In this exercise, I'm going to show you a really great use for arrowheads here inside of CS5, and that's for the creation of callout lines. So the idea is that you have a diagram, and you're trying to assign labels to this diagram, as we are inside of this illustration, and you want to assign a slight arrowhead to the end of your callout line. If you want to follow along with me, go ahead and open this illustration called calloutline.ai, found inside the 07 fill stroke folder. And notice that it contains the final tonal Pohuali calendar, as well as a little bit of text set in Myriad Pro. If you end up getting a font warning, don't worry about it, just click OK and move on. And you also have this line that I set up for you in advance. If you click on that line, and you go ahead and make sure that the stroke is active in the color panel, you'll see that this is a weak black. So 0% for CMY and 100% for K. And you might think, based on the information I've conveyed to you so far, that that's a bad thing. Well, if it was an integrated part of the artwork, it would be a bad thing. However, because it's a fragile line by itself set partially against a white background here, paper white, we want to leave it set to a weak black, because if we had the other colors mixed in, cyan, magenta, and yellow, then the inks might not register exactly with each other, in which case we'd see these fine halftone dots when we actually commercially reproduce a document, potentially around the outline of this line, which would look pretty bad. It'd make the line less sharp as well. Same with the text. When you have text against a white background, you want to leave it weak as well. You want to use as few inks as possible for that text. Now, we do have the line crossing a bunch of different colors, so we will have a trapping issue, and I'll show you how to solve that using something called overprinting. But in the meantime, what I'd like you to do is go to your appearance panel, bring up the stroke panel by clicking on stroke, and then I would like you to specify an arrowhead. And the arrowhead that we're going to use is not a traditional arrowhead like this, because that implies motion, not really something you want to do. You don't have to say the Aztec godhead Bob has an arrow going right into him. Instead, what we want is this guy right there, arrow 21. At least that's what I'd like to see. A nice circle ending. So I'll go ahead and click on that arrowhead, and then I'll zoom in so that we can track its position a little better. And you can see the difference between the intersection of this weak black and that rich black right there. As I say, we'll solve that problem in a moment. Go ahead and bring up the stroke panel once again. And I'm going to align the stroke with the anchor point by clicking on this first align option, and that goes ahead and centers the circle right on that anchor point. It's amazing that we have this kind of control. And next, I'm going to increase the line weight to 2 points, like so. That will increase the size of the arrowhead. So these measurements are based on the current line weight. Then I'll reduce that scale value to 50%. And I'm only worried about this arrowhead. I don't care what happens to the other end of the line, because we don't have an arrowhead at that location, but it went ahead and changed as well. Fair enough. And if you put the arrowhead at the wrong location, obviously you can switch it out. All kinds of control there. All right, now the reason I went with a thicker line weight is because, I'll go ahead and hide that stroke panel and zoom out a little bit. We have to traverse all of this busy artwork with this line, and so I want to put a white line into the black line. So I want to create a superimposed white stroke on top that will be 1 point thick, so that we have half-point black outlines on either side. And I'll do that by grabbing my existing stroke here in the appearance panel and dragging it down to the little page icon in order to duplicate it. Then I will switch the stroke weight to 1 point. I'll change the color from black to white. And I'll switch out the stroke too, because notice currently, let's zoom in again, over here that is, that this circle is not nearly big enough anymore. So we want a nice consistent black half-point line around our white stroke. And in order to ensure that that's the case, I need to increase the size of this circular arrowhead. So I'll click on stroke once again, and I'm going to change this size value to whatever. I'm basically going to have to experiment with the value to see what I get. But what I figured out worked for this illustration is 85%. So when I take that arrowhead value up to 85%, we seem to have a consistent outline around the entire stroke. Now, if I feel like that's too big and I want to take down the size of the black arrowhead, then I would go ahead and switch out the scale value for something else. Let's try 60%, let's say. And that looks pretty good to me. Then we'd switch down to the black arrowhead, click on stroke, and change its value, and I'll have to reduce it. Let's try 35%. I'm just guessing at this point. That's not big enough. So I'll click in that scale value, and I'll press the up arrow key. And each time I press up arrow, I see it grow on the fly. And at about 37%, it looks good to me. You have that kind of amazing control over your arrowheads here inside of Illustrator CS5. And you can even replicate these arrowheads onto other lines if you want to using graphic styles. I'll explain how graphic styles work in a later chapter in this series. In the meantime, I want to make sure that this black stroke looks good against its background, that we're not going to have any trapping issues, for example, and that it matches the rich blacks as it passes over them without resorting to rich blacks out here in the paper white zone. And the way that you do that, I'll go ahead and scroll in just a little bit here, is you select that black stroke and only the black stroke inside the appearance panel. You don't want to apply this function to white because it'll turn white transparent. And then what you do is you bring up your attributes panel. And if you don't see that little nondescript attributes icon, then you go up to the window menu and choose the attributes command. Inside of this panel, I want you to turn on this option, overprint stroke. And that will cause this one stroke to overprint. That is to say, the black will print over all other inks. Instead of the black line knocking out underlying inks, it'll just print right over them. So that leaves a weak black in the white area, and it mixes in the colors as it passes over them throughout the artwork. Now, in order to see what that looks like, because currently we're not seeing the effects of that option, not by default, if you want to see the effects, because notice here, I'll just go ahead and scroll in once again and zoom in on the circular arrowhead, you'll see that we still have a weak black. You can actually see it against the rich black background. Then go up to the View menu and choose Overprint Preview. Or you can mash your fist down and press the Y key. Control-Shift-Alt-Y, Command-Shift-Option-Y on the Mac, and notice how that riches up that black outline only when it passes over other artwork. Again, against page white, you're going to see a standard weak black. That is black ink only. So there's how you might go about using arrowheads inside of your artwork, especially for creating callout lines. This exercise also serves as an introduction to overprinting. We will visit overprinting in more detail in a later chapter in this series.